Patrick Joseph Magee is a former provisional Irish Republican Army volunteer, best known for planting a bomb in the Brighton's Grand Hotel targeting Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and her cabinet, which killed 2 men and 3 women. He is sometimes referred to as the Brighton bomber.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
It was very kind of you, sir, to leave this out for me. There was no one around when I finished my bath, so I started. Hope that's all right, sir.
Of course.
Brighton, October 1984. The IRA have chosen the time and the place. It's Thursday night. The Conservative Party conference is drawing to its close. Mrs. Thatcher and the party faithful are in good spirits. Despite warnings about a possible terrorist attack in Britain, the atmosphere at the Grand Hotel is how the Tories want it, totally relaxed. The Thatchers return to their room shortly before midnight. The Prime Minister works for nearly 3 hours on her keynote speech, which she's to deliver to the conference in the morning. At 2:50 a.m. she uses the bathroom and then returns to her room to check one final paper. The time is precisely 2:54. In a split second in the early hours of Friday, October the 12th, 1984, the IRA have achieved their most daring strike on the British mainland. Everywhere there is confusion, panic, appalling suffering. One minute asleep, the next blown out of their beds. Most who've escaped are much too shocked to know what's happened. Some are not so lucky, trapped under tons of falling masonry. Others are dead. The explosion was on the 6th floor. It shot upwards, dislodging a chimney which came crashing down through an entire column of rooms. Mrs. Muriel McLean was in room 629. She was to die later in hospital. Across the corridor in 628, Mrs. Jean Shattuck took the full force of the blast and was killed instantly. Below in 528, Eric Taylor was also dead. So too in 428, Roberta Wakeham, wife of the Tory party's chief whip. and in 328 the MP for Enfield Southgate, Sir Anthony Berry, also died. In room 228, Norman Tebbit, one of Mrs. Thatcher's most senior cabinet colleagues. Firemen took nearly 4 hours to free him. The Prime Minister too escaped, but the devastation in the bathroom she'd used just minutes before and the bedroom in which she'd been working showed just how close the IRA had come to achieving their aim. Within hours, experts had established the bomb had been placed underneath the bath in room 629, and fragments recovered convinced them a long delay timer had been used. In the hunt for clues, 4,000 dustbin loads of debris were taken away for examination. The police had just one real lead. The hotel register was intact. Their job now was to find everyone who'd stayed in room 629 in the previous 3 months. Scores of people were interviewed all round the world. 10 weeks after the explosion, only one guest had not been found. This was his registration card, the name Roy Walsh, but no one had heard of him at the address he gave. Hoping to confirm his hunch that this was the alias of the Brighton bomber, the man in charge of the investigation appeared on BBC's Crime Watch.
Well, the more time that elapses, the more interesting and significant Mr. Walsh becomes.
No one came forward. No one could identify Mr. Walsh's distinctive writing. At Scotland Yard, fingerprint experts got to work on his registration card. Eventually, 2 vital marks emerged. One a palm print, the other the tip of a little finger. 3 months after the explosion at the Grand Hotel, police had positively identified the missing guest Roy Walsh as Patrick Joseph Magee, a Belfast man in his 30s and a well-known member of the IRA. What's more, they'd been wanting to question Magee for the past 5 years about a series of explosions in the London area. His one distinguishing feature, a finger missing on his right hand. Magee had in fact slipped into Brighton more than 3 weeks before the Tory conference, one amongst hundreds of passengers arriving on the late morning train from London. All the talk that day was about the weather and football. By September standards, it was a very hot Saturday, ideal for the big game between Brighton and Crystal Palace. Magee made for the taxi rank just outside the station, where he hailed Dennis Palmer's cab. Palmer is a man with a particularly keen eye for detail.
What I remember is the weight of the case. It was so much, it was so heavy compared to the usual cases we pick up for people staying for the weekend. That and the camel hair coat that he was wearing. The fact that it was basically the sunniest day we'd had of the year, and he was wearing a coat where everybody else was basically in their shirt sleeves. Funny enough, when we got to the Grand Hotel, we got the porter there that's very sly, and as I said to him jokingly, you better hold on to your nuts with this one, you'll need them.
What the taxi driver didn't realise was that he was carrying 30 pounds of high explosive in the boot of his car. Once in the hotel, Magee paid in cash for a double room. He stayed for 3 days, but none of the staff could identify him, though the night porter had a clear impression there had been a second man in room 629.
After the bar was closed, I had a phone call, and a voice on the phone asked me what I had in the drink line. And so they said that they would have a bottle of vodka and 2 Cokes, which I supplied from my box underneath, then got the waiter to send them up to this room, which was 629 on the 6th floor.
The second man, the hotel staff recall, has never been found. But once Magee was identified, police kept a keen eye on his associates in Belfast. Special branch officers discovered that his wife Eileen, who was still living there, was making monthly trips by train to the Irish Republic. Police in the south were tipped off. They discovered Magee was in Dublin. He was living openly here in the Ballymun housing estate in the north of the city, unaware that he'd been linked with the Brighton bomb. It was now the police took an enormous gamble. Fearing possible extradition problems, they decided to wait and to watch. They believed the terrorist they'd nicknamed the Chancer would return to Britain. In April, just to ensure Magee's suspicions weren't aroused, Jack Rees of the Sussex Police told the Brighton bombing inquest that the suspect's description was too imprecise to be released. But then, consternation. At Connolly Station, Dublin, there was no further sign of Magee's wife. Intelligence reports said that Magee himself had vanished. As police grew increasingly worried, his picture was circulated amongst special branch officers through a confidential edition of the Police Gazette. That was at the beginning of May. By June, the trail was dead. The waiting game had failed. The police knew they'd lost him. The view was ideal, directly opposite the front of the Royal Mews, the back entrance to Buckingham Palace.
Inside his case, Magee pulled out a child's lunchbox. Its contents, the IRA hoped, would spark off the summer bombing campaign. It was packed with pounds of deadly explosive.
This yellow box was a long delay timer, similar to the one used at Brighton. It was already running, and it meant that the explosion could be delayed by up to 48 days. There were also 2 booby traps, a micro switch in the lid and a mercury tilting device. If the box was moved or opened, the bomb would have gone off. This alarm clock gave Magee plenty of time to get out of the hotel before the circuits were switched on. A highly sophisticated bomb. On expert advice, we've altered aspects of its design. A Park Station, where he bought a London travel card using the name Alan Woods. That night, in the same name, he booked into the Gloucester Hotel. 4 days later, on the 20th of June, he was still in London. He rented this flat in the East End, paid the landlord 2 months' rent in advance, and introduced himself as Alan Cooper. Under the floorboards, he hid a loaded revolver. The following day, he was dropped near the flat by a minicab driver. 8 months after Brighton, Britain's most wanted man had established a base in the capital, yet 4 miles away, no one at Scotland Yard had the slightest idea where he was or what he was up to. 16 explosions had been planned using long delay bombs. They were to hit London and a dozen seaside resorts at the height of the summer season. The first 9 bombs were to have 24-day delay timers. The other 7 would have exploded after 48 days. One entry was more precise. Returning from the Rubens, Pat Magee noted all the details: date, time, and place. Yet it still took police 3 hours to find the bomb. Police ripped up the floorboards, smashed open the walls. Everywhere they found fingerprints, but no explosives.
I was left a helpless cripple, but for her the agony was too great. Victim of the modern age, poor